Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so the NBA Cup is over. It's done. It's over.
Thank
and the
God.
winners the Milwaukee Bucks. Darvin Ham and the Milwaukee Bucks have won it all. Darvin Ham, the first coach to go back-to-back, as well as Taurean Prince, the first player to get $1 million in the Cup. He was also on the team last year, but obviously the focus isn't really on them. It's more
Darvin
so on,
Ham's actually 14-0 in the Cup, apparently.
yes, undefeated in the NBA
which is
Cup.
crazy.
Yes. But the NBA Cup MVP, Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? He was brilliant during the NBA Cup, and he was great in this game, right? Obviously, this was a game that was, pretty much pure domination. It was kind of close. I would say, I guess, in the first half or so,
Yeah.
right? And then in the second half, the Bucks kind of pulled away, and you could kind of tell early, other than like maybe the first few minutes, you could kind of tell once the Bucks because they started off down, but once they kind of got back into it and took control, they never really let go of it. You could kind of just see Giannis and Lillard were basically like the two best guys on the floor, right? Like pretty much most of the OKC guys didn't play very well. SGA was 8 for 24, 2 of 9 from 3. The OKC team was 5 of 32 from 3, and that's kind of the key right there, because if you shoot that badly from 3, as we know in the modern NBA, you cannot win in a basketball game, especially if the other team is going to shoot 17 of 40 from 3, just over 40%. And that's kind of been, the big turnaround for the Bucks, right? Because they were 1-6, right, to begin the season. Now they're 14-11. So, obviously, if you think about that, right, they've been playing really good basketball since then, right? I mean, you're basically talking about 13-5 or so. So, since that point, they've been able to turn it around. Giannis, since that point, has basically been playing at an unbelievable pace, right? Well over 30 a game, double-digit rebounds, pretty much hasn't scored less than 20 in a game. Of course, also getting it done on the defensive end. You've gotten good production from Lillard, right? Taurean Prince has been the league leader in three-point percentage, right? He's been starting since Chris Middleton's kind of been working his way back, right? He didn't play in this game because he was sick, but they didn't really need him. Lopez, right, was pretty solid, right? Bobby Portis had a plus 13, right? Shot 2 for 9. But AJ Green, Derry Bird off the bench, 3 of 5 from 3. Gary Trent Jr., 3 of 6 from 3, 13 points. So that's kind of the nice thing that you have here, is that you do have some legitimate three-point shooting around Giannis. Obviously, you got Dame. Of course, you can shoot as well as play make. And it just kind of allows Giannis to just basically bully his way to the basket. And obviously for this OKC team, then the other issue is the fact that they're so small. And they just don't really have any defensive answers for him, right? Like Jalen Williams, they tried that. That didn't really work. I mean, they tried, you can look around the roster, right? They tried Alex Caruso a lot. That was even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then, even like a Kenrich Williams, right? Like, I mean, OKC is just, obviously without both Chet and Hardenstein. Hardenstein played, but they're such a small team when Isaiah Hardenstein's not out there. And they've still been very good on the defensive end, but you just can't shoot that poorly in an NBA game and win realistically. And, obviously, does this make you feel worse about Oklahoma City? Maybe not necessarily, because it is one game and you can shoot. And, horrible shooting games can happen, and you're just not going to win. But, at the same time, it could also be maybe Milwaukee's been overlooked, right, just from the perspective of, this kind of gave us the opportunity to see, because early in their stretch when they were winning games, it was mostly against not great teams. So you're kind of looking at it from the perspective of they're not really that good. They're just playing well against bad teams. They're going to kind of start tricking people into making them think that they're actually good again. But as of late, they have been playing against some better competition, and they've still looked really good. Even in the Celtics game where they lost, they still played well. And then obviously they were dominant in this game. So, I mean, again, not like a whole lot to break down, just because of the fact, that, it was kind of just like a one-sided game. But obviously for the Bucks, it's a good moment because, you won the Cup. you took it seriously, and obviously, Giannis is kind of like almost everything, pretty much everything you would want in a superstar by and large, right? He's kind of setting the example, right? And guys are following, so now they get the money. But hopefully it's not a scenario, say like last year, right? Where say like the Lakers, they win the cup, then they just kind of, really take a tumble. I don't think that's the case, just
Mm.
because I feel like with Giannis, like you're just gonna have a higher floor as long as he's healthy. And they're in the East, right? So there's way more room for error compared to the Western Conference, where if you lose 3-4 games, you could drop all the way down to like the 9-10 spot. But just in general, it's a really good moment for the Bucks. Obviously, these two cup winners, you got Giannis, you got LeBron. Those are two, big time superstars, right? They have that have impressive resumes. But just in general, what were your thoughts, right? Because obviously, we can talk about the game and then we can get into a larger discussion about the cup.
Yeah, I mean, off rip, I think you have to congratulate Giannis and give him props for his performance. And I know a lot of the commentary was, yeah, he's a great scorer, great rebounder, great defender as well, but also a very good passer, and I think he showcased that during this game as well. And yeah, the perfect 1-2 punch combo in theory. That's why people really loved the fact that Damian Lillard was on his way to Milwaukee when the trade first was announced. Everybody fell in love with it immediately, and I think now you're seeing, the gears have begun to turn. In this game, I think those two guys did everything right. I think the rest of the Bucks kind of followed in their footsteps as well. They treated this like a playoff game. If you look at the rotation and who played, it wasn't. They didn't, go super duper deep. A lot of these guys played garbage minutes, like 2 minutes. But if you look at the majority of the bulk minutes, a lot of guys you would kind of want on the floor. Come playoff time. So I think all those guys who were out there definitely, have solidified their roles, I think, for this team, when we do get to the playoffs. And then, from Oklahoma City's perspective, nothing to really like from them. I mean, I guess you got open looks, but they weren't going in, hence the 5 for 32 3-point percentage. But, you just expect a lot more offensively. And I guess, we kind of predicted that defensively they probably wouldn't have an answer for Giannis, but defensively they didn't really have an answer for anybody, to be honest. So that's the funny part about it. And I guess, you do have to give them leeway because they didn't have Chet, but at the same time, still inexcusable in my opinion. But what were you going to say?
And Milwaukee didn't have Middleton, and also like
Sure.
Milwaukee, we didn't think they would be able to slow down SGA, and they did. Like they
Yeah.
limited him to 8 for 24 shooting, and
Yeah.
2 of 9, which is kind of what you want, right? Like Andre Jackson Jr., that's the guy that I mentioned that would probably have to guard SGA, and he did a good job. And then, but also like his team defense too, right?
Yeah.
Like they're able to kind of rotate, they're able to get into spots, right? Like they can play some drop, and things like that to kind of just make it a little bit, tougher, I guess, and kind of force him from just getting easy looks around the rim. And he didn't get to the line a whole lot, right? I mean, like, I guess he didn't really shoot a
No.
whole lot of free throws in this
4.
game. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, so, it's kind of like if you could kind of figure out a way to try to slow down SGA, this is kind of a way that you'd want to do it, right? You put some length and athleticism against him and then kind of force him to not be able to just get his way to the free throw line. Easier said than done, of course.
Yeah.
But Milwaukee did everything right pretty much in this game. So,
Yeah.
again, just hats off to them. So we'll see if they can continue to build off of this, right?
Yeah.
After they hang the banner up and everything else. But just in general,
Oh my gosh, man.
yeah, but just in general, what a ride for the cup. I mean, again, for the cup, I think the cool thing is that again, you're getting people, to kind of care about a lot of these games earlier in the season than you normally would, right? Because we know in general the early season viewership is not very good normally, which kind of makes sense because you got other things around it. But also the players, right? Because the players are playing, at a level and with a level of focus that you don't normally see. Because usually December is kind of the ugly stretch, for the NBA, right? Like that's when you kind of start to get in your trade season. That's when you have some teams that maybe might have started off hot, but now they're kind of starting to slow down and show some fatigue, right?
Mhm.
People call it the dog days of the NBA, right? Like December, January. I know we're not in January yet, but just the fact that you do have some high level basketball games this early in the season is good for them. In terms of things maybe we like or things we don't like, things we could change. I mean, the Vegas courts, they were certainly less distracting, right, than I think the regular ones, right, where it's like, you had Steve Kerr mention he felt like he was descending into the depths of some places, right, with the Rockets court because it was bright red. There was the Nuggets one that was, an interesting color of yellow, right? Then you also had like the Minnesota one, which was green, which was like lime green or whatever it was. Some of them are fine. Some of the courts were fine, but then there were others that I think were a little bit distracting. I did like the Vegas courts. I guess the question is, do we like it being in Vegas by the end, right? Because this one felt, in terms of the crowd, maybe at times a little bit more muted in a couple of these games, just because of the fact that, the teams in terms of who they are and where they were. But what do you think?
I think it needs to be in a neutral site. I think
Yeah.
that is something that's good. I
Hmm.
wouldn't be opposed to them moving it around. But I think Vegas is a good spot because obviously and clearly what they're doing is testing, the market for, how many tickets can we sell? Is there going to be, enough motion for us to, get something started and create maybe an expansion team or something like that? That's kind of where my mind is at with it in terms of the location, but presentation, cup wide and like in all rounds, I think was great. I thought the jerseys were all pretty good. There are a few lazy ones. I'm not going to name them, but
Hmm.
I think that kind of happens with every set of jerseys. Like there's always like a couple in a set that people don't enjoy at all. But regardless, I think presentation wise, they killed it. Just like last year. So I have no gripes with that. I just feel like there could be a little bit more, I guess, sense to the madness, I guess like a method to the madness because I know it's supposed to be random, but it feels like there's no, I guess, storylines with this kind of stuff. Like in March Madness, I know that's also random as well, but there's like a lot of storylines that go along with that throughout the season. I feel like something like that should be kind of implemented. I don't know if there could be like a shorter ranking system or something like that? Can we maybe utilize divisions a little bit more? That would kind of be my thought
Hmm.
process on all the stuff leading up to the cup because I think once you get to the championship, it really comes down to who's going to be the better team and who's going to play better. But as a product, I didn't personally like this game at all. If you watched it, you knew that it was pretty much over. Once the third quarter started, you could just tell Oklahoma City came out cold. They didn't have an answer for anything. So that would be my kind of concern is like those games are pretty much a toss up once you get into the championship round. So maybe we could do something about that. It was balanced in terms of like, seeding and record, I would say, star power and, talent, but it's just a one game scenario, so it's a little bit different than what we're used to as NBA fans.
Yeah. And then I guess kind of the last bit on this cup thing. Um, like, does this game kind of change your perspective on, both of these teams, right? Or is it kind of just doesn't really make much of a difference?
I would say it kind of reaffirms my beliefs on Oklahoma City, and I think we share them as well. Great team. They have a lot of talent, but you're lacking in size. And we already know Chet was out for this game, but you could definitely tell. Yeah, Hartenstein is amazing, but look at that bench. There's nobody that's probably over 6'9", right? If I'm really thinking about it. So that
If Kenrich Williams is the backup center, basically.
yeah, and I think he's like 6'7". I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's
Jalen
not.
Williams, I guess, will when he comes back, but like even then,
Even
you'd
then
like
he's
him.
yeah, like I don't know. So you would like to have a little bit more size and maybe a little bit more, I guess, like rim protection in terms of that stuff. But that was kind of already something that we already knew. Like if you watch the NBA, you knew that
Yeah.
already going into the season. But once again, it just reaffirms it. But from the Bucks' perspective, I think you walk away feeling a little bit better about them
Hmm.
in regards to maybe a solidified rotation. You're getting some stuff out of a lot of the free agents you brought in, like Gary Trent Jr. I think him playing, coming off the bench. You already talked about that in the previous episode. Much better role for him. Much better. And then Andre Jackson Jr. You kind of need him to be the defensive stalwart that he was kind of advertised to be. So that's helpful. And I guess you're really just hoping and praying that Chris Middleton can come back and he looks, you know, somewhat usable. But in this game, you didn't need him, so I think that's also a good sign. And as long as Giannis's play doesn't taper off, which it won't, I think the Bucks stock keeps going up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that they've gotten out of the funk that they were in earlier in the
Hmm.
season, and I think now they are a much more legitimate team. I still don't feel comfortable picking them, maybe over like the Celtics or or from that
Agreed.
perspective.
Agreed.
But I think you still feel better about it than you did, a month ago, right?
Yeah,
Because I mean,
100%.
we never really like were on the period of like on the point of like, yeah, they need to trade Giannis and just blow this up. But
Mm-mm.
those conversations, people kept talking about it. But now you're definitely out of there, right? Like now they're a much more serious team that you actually have to take
Yeah.
seriously. And they've earned, well, if they're, the people who doubted them probably need to start kind of taking them more seriously now. And then
I
I
am.
guess the people, who were, I guess higher on them earlier, now they can feel better about them, and maybe take the victory lap. But we still have to see if they can get it done. But I think again, regardless, this is the first step, and it starts with the leaders of the team, and it's good to kind of see them take the team on their backs.
Yeah.
And just hopefully they can kind of continue to figure out some stuff, maybe make a trade, make another move because
Hmm.
it does feel like they might need like just one more rotational guy.
Get rid of one of
You know,
those young guys, maybe like Beauchamp or something like that. I don't know if that's possible, but probably not.
Yeah. So if they can swap out and get somebody at the deadline, like that'll really help. It'll still be a tough matchup. Would you take them over the Cavs?
Hmm. That's a good question because I think I
Yeah.
like the top end talent of Milwaukee better.
Hmm.
Like I like Dame and Giannis as a duo a little bit more
Right.
than any duo that Cleveland could offer. But Cleveland plays team basketball. Like that is a team.
Mhm.
Um, that's a really good question. Now that I'm thinking about
Yeah.
it, I haven't really thought about that, and we
'Cause
need to
that's the
start thinking about stuff like this.
right. 'Cause the Cavs have played so well
Yeah.
over the course of the entire season thus far. So it makes you feel better about what they've done up to this point. You just kind of wonder, is there a version of this Bucks team that could get better than that?
Mm,
Maybe, I don't know. But
I don't think so. I think you kind of have to give it to Cleveland. Like, you look at their
okay.
roster and what they've been able to accomplish, like you said, through almost 30 games now. I think, it's kind of been solidified that a lot of these teams are what they are at this point. You like what Evan Mobley's been able to do, Jared Allen. I think I like the team collectively of Cleveland a
Yeah.
crap ton more than Milwaukee, but I do like the high end talent in Giannis
Yeah.
and Dame a
Yeah.
little bit more than what
Like for
Cleveland has to
Milwaukee,
offer.
you like the 1-2 more, but then for the Cavs, you like, I don't know, 3 through whatever more.
Sure, sure, and it's like, yeah.
The
So I'd
tipping
take
point,
I'd take Cleveland.
yeah. Yeah, it's just the tipping point is probably, you know, if Giannis plays at that level, can the Cavs collectively match and kind of figure
Yeah,
that out?
yeah, because he could
So
take over a game. Like, and it's not that Cleveland doesn't have guys that could take over a
right,
game. Like, we already know what Donovan Mitchell can do and how special he is on the offensive end. But I think
right.
Giannis, as a whole and as a complete package, can just offer you so much more than really any single player on Cleveland. That's kind of the conversation. So I wouldn't be mad if somebody picked the Bucks, like, over Cleveland. Like, I would completely understand it. But from our perspective, I guess
We just have to
I would stick
continue
with
to
Cleveland.
see where they finish, I think,
Yeah,
ultimately, because right
yeah.
now the Bucks are what? Like, they're in the 5-ish spot, right? So they would need to kind of move a little bit higher up, which they can.
Hmm.
Because, like with the Magic, unfortunately, right, because of their injuries, now they've lost 3 in a row, so they're starting to kind of slip.
Yeah,
The Knicks, the Knicks have played well, right? They're
yeah.
not that far ahead of the Bucks, but they've played pretty well. They have a game coming up, as we're recording against the Timberwolves. But like the Celtics and Cavs, you're not catching them, I don't think. Although I think the Celtics, they just lost to the Bulls, but like even with that, like they're still way ahead,
Yeah,
of pretty much everybody outside of Cleveland. So
yeah. I'll
um
formally apologize to
mhm,
all the Bucks fans.
mhm,
I'm not walking it back because I don't think that they're gonna
right.
win the title, but I
Yeah.
will
And that's
say,
where
they have been playing a lot better, and I do see the vision of what the
right.
Bucks fans were talking about,
Yeah.
in terms
And
of
that's where
bringing
I
these
am
guys
too.
in.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at too, where I don't think they'll win the title, but I think they're good.
Yeah,
And I think that whatever was going on earlier in the season, they've clearly fixed, and it's not a problem anymore, particularly with how Giannis is playing. They just got to be healthy. I mean, like that's been the really the biggest issue more than anything is Giannis has not played a full series in like a couple seasons, right? And
yeah,
then the last time he did play a full postseason, right? Then Middleton was hurt, right, against the Celtics. We've talked about that. So that's kind of and can we trust it to not happen again? Hopefully it doesn't happen again, but that's kind of the other key problem there.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So now moving on. We haven't talked about it really, but it's kind of been a discussion for the last couple of weeks, right? And it is the NBA ratings. So obviously there's been like a big discussion about how the ratings are down. Adam Silver himself, right, was kind of asked this question. And he kind of, and because people have been talking about like, even though some of these things are doing okay, they're still down, right? Like say through the NBA Cup, the ratings are down from last year. Regular season viewership is down. Now for Silver, right? He did acknowledge it, but he also kind of pushed back and also mentioned like across other, cable television sports, right? Viewership is down. Like men's college basketball is down by like 20%. Women's college basketball is down by like 40%. And then hockey's down by 28%. And again, there's some reasons for that, right? Like it's the streaming aspect, right? Where by and large, like now there's a lot, you can kind of make the case that people stream more than they watch basic cable, especially if you get into the younger demographics,
Hmm.
right? Such as ourselves and others.
Yeah.
Like they just don't watch cable at all. I mean, from an NBA perspective, right? Because that's what this conversation's about. There's a lot of people who don't really watch the games that much, right? Like they'll kind of get a lot of the information from elsewhere, right? Like through social media, through highlights and clips. So engagement with the NBA, I don't necessarily feel like is completely down, but in terms of the viewership, you do kind of wonder, like what's going on here? Because there's been so many conversations about, all these different issues, and there's no real one specific issue. But, what are your thoughts kind of in terms of like, what do you think is going on here? And is this, something that you could fit that could be fixable?
Well, it's the TV deal. I think that's the big culprit here, where they've divvied up and carved up all of these games. Like there's some premier matchups that like hardcore fans would love to see, right?
Mhm.
But then nobody wants to shill out all that money. Like say you're paying for Prime, Netflix, and cable already, right?
Right.
Then that one game, that one, game that you want to see that's like a marquee matchup that's not on national television, you got to buy League Pass for that. And like a lot, this stuff adds up. I think for a working individual, it's very freaking hard to, be able, not just to be able to watch it, but to be able to afford to watch it.
Mhm.
And I know that might be, I don't know, that might be a hot take, but that's kind of what I think is going on here, where they've just divvied stuff up to the point where there's no need for this stuff to be kind of like all over the place. It should really be on a select few channels. But the the problem is that's where the NBA makes the majority of its money from. Like, is those TV deals, because you look at the numbers regarding those TV deals, and the numbers are astronomical. So I don't think they're kind of hurting from this at all. And at the end of the day, we already know how the NBA goes. I think it's kind of normal for people to not really care about the NBA at this point in the season. We all know it's time to shine is post All Star break and that playoff rush. So I think we'll be okay, because I think, I don't know. It's kind of tough to talk about it at times, because you
There's so many.
wonder. Yeah, you wonder, because there could be something else completely going on. I know illegal streaming, that doesn't even count, and that's what a lot of people are using to bypass that paywall that I was
Yeah,
talking about. There's
pay
tons of
for it.
illegal sites. There's millions, and you take one
And people don't
out,
want to pay.
people don't want to pay for it. Why should somebody pay for it when they can just, click through a bunch of like, 20 ads, but still see the same product that somebody else is, paying a lot of money for.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think that's what's going on.
And then what do you think about, the conversation? Because I do kind of agree, like where it's like I think the access is kind of tough, right? Where it's like if you don't have, and then because there's the dumb rule where like say even if you have League Pass, let's say your favorite team is your local team, right? If you have League Pass, and then you can't watch them, right? Because like say you are a fan of, I don't know, like let's say you live in New York, right? And you're a Knicks fan.
Hmm.
Well, you can't watch Knicks games on League Pass because they get blacked out. You have to watch it on the local station. And if you don't have cable, then forget about it because you can't watch it, right?
Yep.
Like you just like unless you do, kind of some of the things that you mentioned, you're just kind of stuck, right?
Yes.
So that's a problem. And because there are some teams where like where like fans have mentioned like, yeah, I live in this area and I cannot watch my favorite team's games, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's a
I
real
think it was
thing.
yeah, I think it was the Bally Sports one, right? Where that one was like the one that had the biggest issue. Then
Denver
and then
last
there's like
year. This isn't anything new. Like this happened in
right.
Denver last year. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, then you kind of look around and then it's like, you have this scenario like say we're recording this on a Thursday and there were no games on Wednesday. And so then what they did was they basically had like almost everybody play today, right on Thursday. Obviously if you're watching it now it's Friday. And so there's some games that like how much you can't watch at the same time, right? Like, because I mean, of course, like, yeah, you could have 3, 4 monitors up if you want,
Yeah.
but like there are some games that you won't be able to catch, right? Like the nationally televised game, is OKC and Orlando, right? But then like at the same time, right, you had like Spurs Hawks, you had like Nets Raptors, Warriors Grizzlies, I think was like the hour after. But just a lot of games where like it's kind of tough to watch. Of course, we know the 82 game season, right? There's a lot of games, and people just, people have talked about that. There's too many games. That's not going to be something that they're going to adjust. Do you think there's anything to this style of play discussion that people have been talking about where people are saying that there's too many threes and that, because there's been a couple of angles, because some people have said the 3-point shot is a problem because there's too many threes that are taken. And then it boils down to quote unquote, if you make a bunch of threes, you win. If you miss a bunch of threes, you lose. And then there's also this other discussion of the idea that a lot of teams kind of play the same way. I think even Adam Silver sort of kind of mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. Like, I understand like the whole thing of teams playing the same kind of way. Well, I mean, the game adapts and changes, and I think teams have to figure out a way to win games ultimately. And in regards to the 3-point thing,
Mm-hmm.
that's a tough discussion because I think from a base standpoint, that statement is 100% true. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you make more threes than your opponent, objectively, you are going to win the game. But I feel like that's also somewhat of a casual take, like
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's so much more that goes into basketball than just shooting threes. But
Right.
you can't ignore the fact that the volume of 3-pointers has gone up, but that's just the evolution of the game. I feel
Right.
like
Yeah.
like you can't compare. I know that's been another narrative. Sorry to switch
Right.
gears, but that's been a huge narrative of like comparing the early 2000s to now, and people saying like, yeah, it was amazing back then. Yeah, it was, but at the same time, we have the same level of talent, if not more, in the league right now. And I don't think
Right.
that should be overlooked at all. And
Mm-hmm.
I will never understand why people use the 3-point shot as the scapegoat as to why the league is suffering. Like, I
Yeah.
will say, at times, it is annoying to watch when, say, let's take the number one culprit, like Boston.
Mm-hmm.
It's annoying when they jack 43s, but 40 to 53s, actually. But if they're making it, that's just their style of play. We kind of just have to sit there and suck it up. There's nothing that you can do to nerf that in quotes. Like what are we gonna do? Like put a restriction on the amount of threes that a team can take? No,
Yeah.
that's not gonna happen.
Right.
I would say personally, what I don't like from watching the NBA thus far through this season
Mm-hmm.
is the free throws and the lack of
The
I guess
reviews.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been the free throws. The refs have been quite annoying, and I would also say defense at times. It seems like it's hot or cold. I will. That's the one thing I will give people who make that argument of the early 2000s and before. Defense back then was a little bit different. The game has changed. It's definitely in the favor of offense. I'm a guy who's like, I'm all for hand checking. Bring it back. Let's bring a certain level of physicality back to the game.
Mm-hmm.
That has been lost, and I think that's the problem. Like, you just see a volume of like offensive leeway that defenders just don't have, and I think that it gets to a point where it not makes it unwatchable, but it makes it annoying to watch, if that makes sense.
It's interesting because, last year there was a stretch where, like they started kind of changing the officiating and then all the free throws were down. Teams weren't getting to the line as much. And there were some teams where it was really changing how they were able to play, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, like it is something where it's like you said, the game changes and evolves. And to be honest, I know people mention how great those eras are, but like if you go back and watch some of those games, some of them are a little tough to watch just because of how the game was played. Like especially if you look at the center position, there was kind of a stretch where there were a lot of centers, right, where they would, even if they're not really that good, they just give them the ball and just back them down. They had that old rule where like you could back a guy down for like 20 seconds,
Yep.
right? You can just watch a guy just back a guy down in the post, right? A lot of guys that couldn't really shoot, right? So that also kind of changes how you could defend. So I mean, again, the game changes, the game evolves, right? Like you're not going to have the same type of basketball that you had like in the 50s, right? Or the,
Yeah.
70s or 80s or anything like
Thank
that.
God.
But yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the good thing here. And then there's kind of one thing that I've also kind of thought about maybe with the ratings, and we kind of talked about it last season where we were
Okay.
kind of trying to figure out who the face of the NBA is going to be.
Good point.
And it still doesn't really feel like they've kind of found that person yet, right?
Yeah.
It still kind of feels like they're searching. And I think you can kind of tell that, obviously with Steph and LeBron, they are, the current pillars, of the current association, right? And they're still kind of trying to, market and profit off them, which is fine because they're the two, most recognizable guys out there. But it still feels like, there was some aspect of maybe they also didn't do a great job of kind of marketing. And like, but like, then there's also some certain aspects where like, it feels like the league kind of goes through a cycle of that, right? Like there was a stretch where people were kind of out on the NBA, like I guess in the 70s, then you had the 80s with Magic and Bird, right? Then you had the 90s with Jordan, right? Shaq and Kobe, right? Then you had a stretch where like people were like, Pistons scoring like 70 points a game. Like I'm kind of out on this one. Same with the Spurs, right? And then, obviously now you're kind of in the LeBron and then obviously Steph as well. But it feels like they just haven't necessarily found that guy yet. And you can't really force it, right? Like it kind of just has to happen, I think, naturally, right? Like LeBron comes into the league, right? And then people are naturally drawn to him. But then also, like, he actually delivered, right, on the potential that he was supposed to bring into the league, right? Steph, he wasn't looked at that when he first came in, but then people naturally gravitated towards him with his style of play. And then you kind of look at like right now, who is that, right? That's kind of the issue there. Like
Mhm.
even like people we've talked about that could be potential faces, right? Like Tatum just doesn't really seem like he is probably going to be that just because I think people aren't drawn to his personality, not necessarily his style of play,
Mhm.
right? Edwards looks like he was kind of on the path to that. Now he shoots like 12 threes a game.
Mhm.
So I guess, he still is a cool guy and things like that. Wemby, we'll see. People usually aren't quite as drawn to centers, but I think he can be a guy that's popular. But remember Zion, he came into the league and the NBA was trying to kind of make him like a future face, and it
Yeah.
just hasn't panned out because he hasn't been healthy. So we're still not at that point yet, and we're kind of waiting, right? Like, basketball, we kind of remember like the era, right, where LeBron goes to the Heat, and then everybody was locked in because you either were loving the Miami Heat or you despised them, right? Like people were watching to see what was going to happen. Of course, you had the Cavs Warriors stretch, right? With LeBron and Steph, and then it heightened, right? When Durant comes in, then you kind of are waiting to see what that team looks like. And we haven't had that moment just yet, right? Like, and there are guys that are really good, that we've talked about, even guys that are overseas players. Maybe the American fans just aren't quite as drawn to some of those guys,
Very
right?
good
Like,
point.
it's a global game. So I think, like, worldwide, it has grown, but maybe there's certain aspects where it's like, there's probably some other things that have to be done. But I think it kind of starts with trying to find that person that they can kind of build the league around. And they haven't gotten that yet. And we haven't had somebody that people are just automatically gravitating to because they're still gravitating towards, the veteran guys, which is fine, right? Like, say, like the Olympics game, right? That was probably the most watched game this season.
It was
And you're
amazing.
watching, yeah, and you're watching Steph take over in the fourth quarter, right, on a big stage for the gold medal. And we haven't had that. And like you said, like early regular season, you're not matching that anyways, because that's just not how it goes.
Mhm.
But it would be something that I think as it goes on, I'd be very curious to see how that develops. Because we've talked about like a number of guys that could be it, but that hasn't occurred just yet. And we're still waiting on it. Because those guys also will have to probably just have a little bit more success down the road. But I don't know. Like it feels like we're kind of in a transitional phase now, right? Because those other guys, and you can add Durant, I guess, in there too, if you want. Where it does feel like that. Obviously, those guys are getting ready to, in the next few years, they'll be on their way out. And we haven't really replaced them with guys that people are automatically like, all right, I'm in. Right?
Yeah, I would agree because I think, there's even guys that you left out, like from
Right.
like Ja. I remember like when people were
Exactly.
trying to say that Ja was going to be the face. I
Right.
can't be mad at it considering his play at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just funny, and I feel like Giannis at one point had a shot, but I think
Hmm.
it kind of goes back to what you were saying. Like a lot of American watchers are probably not going to say and be willing to say that Giannis is the face of the league, and that's just the harsh truth. Like Jokic too. Like I just feel
Yeah.
like you can be the best, but if your personality doesn't resonate with the majority, then you probably won't be the face because like look at the faces that we've had previously. Like we've had Jordan, Kobe,
Hmm.
LeBron. Those are all pretty relatable guys. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, whatever, whoever you want to put up for that. Those are all pretty relatable people. I think in certain aspects, but that's the problem. And like you said, they tried it. They really tried it. They've tried, and I feel like it felt very inauthentic when they did kind of put these guys forward, like Anthony Edwards. There was a lot of, I'm gonna say it, glaze. But like I'm serious. Like it didn't feel genuine. Like I know he's still a likable person and he's beloved by a lot of NBA fans, but um, the entire community hasn't embraced him in a certain way yet. Wemby, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he could be the best player in the league, but at this point, I don't know if he could be the face. I think that might be a little bit too much to ask. And then, like you said, with Jason Tatum, I think as long as he's on the Boston Celtics, he will never be able to be the face of the league, unfortunately. Um, so yeah, that is a good point because I think you need somebody to propel the league forward where it's like when
Right.
when you say the three letters NBA, you automatically think of one guy. And
Hmm.
at the moment it's still LeBron or Curry, like you said. So that definitely needs to happen, but like you said, you can't rush that at all. Like that's
Right.
something that's going to have to happen and take time. And I think that's going to be what happens in general. Like I'm curious and I wish we had a time machine where we could just go fast forward and see what a lot of these guys' careers are going to
Right.
look like in 15 years, but we really just kind of have to wait and see.
Right, exactly. Because that's the thing is like it just some of these things kind of just happen
Yeah.
naturally, and you don't always expect it. And then there's other times where you can just kind of look and see like, oh yeah, that guy's gonna be it.
We also need a
But
dynasty. I feel like that would help as well.
okay, so like let's say just kind of spitballing, let's say like the Boston Celtics win like three of the next five,
Yeah, I would
right?
say
Would
I
that
would say
be
that brings in a whole different level
enough?
of engagement. I think because now you're gonna have a whole demographic. They already have it somewhat, but they're gonna be magnified and multiplied of haters that tune in just to watch that team crumble. Like we've seen that before. We saw it with Golden State. Like
Yep.
as much as they were embraced, they were hated a lot.
Same with the
Spurs,
Heat.
Heat,
Yeah.
yeah, the Heatles. Oh my God, that was rough.
Yeah.
There was a
So
lot of hate with that one.
yeah. So, we'll see, how this progresses, because I think also it'll be interesting to see what it looks like in the postseason. I mean, again, you're not going to have the ratings that you had like 30 years ago, anyways,
Mm-mm.
just because the viewership has changed. But it is always an interesting discussion. And, I do kind of wonder, some people have also mentioned maybe some more negative coverage, right? Like, because like sometimes there's people that cover the NBA in a negative way, and that tends to get like more clicks as opposed to like if you just kind of positively talk about it. There's a lot of different angles, and we could spend hours on it. But obviously, with this podcast, you only have but so much time really to discuss. You can't do a 20-hour thing on it. But
Right.
it is a worthwhile discussion just because everybody's been talking about it, and I thought we should also kind of, give our 2 cents on it just
Yeah.
because of the fact that, is there a way to maybe fix some of it? Yeah, like fix the review stuff. You shouldn't have a
Please.
scenario where like there's 2 minutes left in the game and it takes like 30 minutes because of reviews. Like that's kind of obvious stuff, right? That's the type of stuff that like we know that should never happen. And we thought they fixed it and then they didn't. But The three stuff, I mean, like that's like you said, it's the natural evolution of the game. And like say for the Celtics, right? Like, yeah, they do jack up threes, but they also like generate a lot of good looks, right? Like, yeah, they will take up some horrible shots sometimes, but like even though they take a ton, they do make a ton. So that's not, so that's more appealing than if they took 53s and shot like 30% every
Right,
game.
right, right.
And then also now they're the best at doing it, but so that's a little bit different than say if it's like the Houston Rockets taking up like 53s or
Mhm.
and there are some teams that don't take, like the Nuggets don't take a lot of threes, but they haven't been as good this year. Like you said, that's kind of what you have to do in order to win in the NBA now, right? Like you can't necessarily just be like, we're gonna go complete opposite and like just not take a ton of threes. Even
Yeah.
like Minnesota, right, which kind of broke the mold of maybe like some of the teams going small. They still were more than willing to take and make threes. Like so, that's kind of something that you have to factor in there. Obviously the previous iteration, but
Yeah.
just in general, it's a good conversation because people have been talking about it. You can't really ignore it, but then you also look at the fact that they signed a huge media deal. So how bad is it, right? Like how disastrous of a scenario is it that people aren't watching it as much? And there's just, and also like just in general, like you need casual fans anyways, like because like you said, a lot of people can't watch every game, every minute of every game, for every team over the course of the season, right? Like that's, for many people that's not feasible, right? Because they're just not able to, whether it's because of their jobs, personal life, or whatever. That's just that you're gonna have a lot of casual fans.
Yeah.
And it's not an insult to be a casual fan. It's just a matter of like, you're gonna have to find ways, because the diehard fans, they're gonna watch, right? Like they're gonna watch regardless. And some people will grow in and out of it. Like there are some people that just don't like watching the games as much anymore. But the casual fans, like those are the people that because they tune in and out, you got to find ways to keep them involved, and that's the hope of what the cup does. But we'll continue to see how this situation progresses. But it's not something that's like you said is going to be solved this season. It's going to
No.
take some time,
Yeah.
as they kind of try to figure out how to move into this next era of the NBA because we are in a transitional moment, I think, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's going to be a natural progression of things. Like there's no way that you can just, like I said, like force people to stop shooting threes. You can't just prop somebody up and say, this is the face and he's the face whether you like it or not. It's not how it
Right.
works. Like we as a collective are going to choose our face. And we as a collective are going to enjoy watching the NBA at some point. Like it's just going to happen.
Right. Um, So now we're moving on into the last couple of topics before we wrap things up. Um, so now we're 20 something games into the season, and I do kind of wonder, like, say in terms of because we've talked about the season so far. I guess if you were to kind of maybe like take maybe two teams, right? So let's say like most disappointing, most surprising, right? Where are you kind of at this point in the season with that?
Um, hmm, that's a good question. I would say most disappointing would probably be Sacramento. I didn't
Mhm.
expect them to be overall this mid. I thought they would be
Okay.
better than what they are. They're currently sitting at 13 and 14.
Hmm.
So just a little bit worse than the Spurs. But, overall, I think they've had some good individual play, but this is definitely a team that needs to shake a little. I don't know. They need
Hmm.
to shake some things up, I think, at the deadline. And I think that's what the goal is. And that's what the reporting has somewhat suggested. I just
Hmm.
thought they would be a little bit better, considering that, they finally had a somewhat of a big three. Three offensive options that they could go to
Hmm.
consistently in night out. I just thought that they would stack up a little bit better in the Western Conference than they did last year. But
Hmm.
in my opinion, they might be a little bit worse than last year. So that's kind of how I feel about them. Did you want me to give my positive one, my surprise one next, or
Yeah, I
did
got
you want to did you want
yeah.
to comment on the Kings?
Yeah, I'll comment on the Kings. The
Sure.
the thing that's interesting about the Kings is the fact that they are 13 and 14. They're a game below 500, but they are 11th in net rating. Now, if you watch them, I think kind of mainly the issue is, interestingly enough, they've not been a very good crunch time team,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's kind of something that I think is the most surprising aspect is that in general, you kind of assume that this team was going to be, because of the offensive guys and personnel that they have, you'd think they'd be pretty good in crunch time, but they really haven't. They're like 2-8 or so, or 2-6 in crunch time. And that's a major problem for them because, like, again, they have a positive net rating, but a lot of that stems from they lose a lot of close, that the reason why they have a lot of these losses is because they've lost a lot of close games. Go back and look at how many games they've lost by like just a few points, right? They lost that Nuggets game by like a point. They lost to the Wolves, right, by like a point or two, right? The earlier in the season, the Anthony Edwards free throws. They lost that game to the Wolves in overtime. And then they've had like a couple of games where they cut it close to make it look like a closer game. Like they had a game against LA where they were getting, where they were down like double digits in the fourth and then cut it back and tried to close it out. But just like in general, that's kind of been the problem for them is they can't close. So that's disappointing for them is because that's supposed to be a big aspect of their team, right? You're talking about, they got two guys that are generally in the running for clutch player of the year the last couple of years, right? Especially in the regular season. So that's the part that I think is disappointing about them. And that's where, they're going to have to kind of fix up some of that. And part of it is at the end of the games, they can't get stops. So that's kind of the other problem too. Even though like defensive ratings wise, they're 14th, which isn't bad. But that's the kind of the area of the game where you're kind of hoping that it'd be a little bit better. They're 6th in offensive rating. So maybe you thought they'd be better there, but that's the part where I think it's tough. But I don't think we weren't really like super high on the Kings going into the season anyways. Like
No.
not that DeRozan was bad or anything, but it was kind of a weird fit, but we understood the offensive aspect. And now like they don't shoot that many threes anymore and it's like is that really that much of a surprise? I mean, like, they got a lot of guys in that group that don't shoot, that where 3-point shooting is not a strong suit of theirs, right? Like, not Fox, Sabonis, DeRozan. Like, not that any of them can't make threes, but none of those guys are high volume 3-point shooters where, that's a big part of their game, right? Most of those guys' games is, inside the 3-point line. So, and that's kind of a perfect example of, maybe that type of offensive style doesn't work as much in today's NBA, right?
Yeah.
Where we go back to the year they made the playoffs, right? They were one of the highest volume and best 3-point shooting teams in the league, right?
Mhm.
And now it's a very different roster compared to what it was. And also like Keegan Murray hasn't been good. So that's kind of the other factor as
Mhm.
well. So, and some of the other role guys haven't been as good. But yeah, it's definitely been disappointing.
Yeah. And then for my surprising team on a positive note, I think this one kind of goes without saying. It's going to be Cleveland for me.
Mhm.
And I think an honorable mention would be Atlanta for sure. But Cleveland for me, I didn't expect them to be 23-4, at this point in the season. So I think you have to tip your hat to them and what they've been able to accomplish. We already kind of hinted at it earlier. Team ball, generate very good looks, very similar to what Boston does. They create a lot of motion, create a lot of havoc that kind of makes it hard to follow all five guys on the floor at the same time, especially if you're playing zone. So yeah, they do a great job of generating open looks. They're actually hitting their shots. A couple of bounce back seasons for a couple of guys. Darius Garland returning to form. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell looking pretty solid as well. And then the two bigs, I just really love that starting lineup. And then they found some great gems off the bench. So I think you do have to shout out like guys like Ty Jerome. And then I think Strus just came back, so that's also a W for them
And
as
now
well.
Oro's out,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Yeah, but Strus is back, so I think that will kind of help a little bit. But yeah, I didn't expect them to be above Boston in the standings at this point. And it's not like Boston can't catch up. That's not what I'm saying. I just thought
Right.
that Cleveland would kind of be a guaranteed lock for like the third or fourth seed. Like I
Yeah.
thought that their ceiling was the third or fourth. So
Yeah, because
shout
we
out to them.
talked about we talked about what the standings in the East might look like and which teams were probably going to fall. And I think we kind of had the Cavs, like you said, somewhere in that maybe 3 to 5 range,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there were a couple of teams that I don't think we were quite as high on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Atlanta's definitely a positive for sure. We've talked about that already. Disappointing. I think the Pacers definitely have been pretty
Good pick.
disappointing. I mean, I know that they're playing better as of late, but obviously then there's also like the other injury factors. But I think that's the part that's kind of tough just because of the fact that, I think we were relatively high on this team. We did think they would probably fall into the play in just because we thought like Philly would probably jump up, right? And maybe a couple other teams. But to see them kind of struggle the way that they have, I think has been tough. Where, even against where like they haven't even had a difficult schedule and they haven't really played that good. And that's the part where it's a little concerning. Again, they have had injuries, right? They lost both of their backup centers. Neesmith has barely played, right? Nemhard has barely played. But it's just tough because like then you look at Halliburton, he hasn't been consistently as good this season. And it seems like he's going to be playing better. So hopefully that's the case. But just in general, I think that's kind of the tough part. The Suns were kind of in that tier as well, right? Obviously for them, like Durant's been hurt. He's come back and they've kind of been able to win a couple of these games. It's just kind of frustrating for the Suns because it's like it shouldn't it shouldn't be a scenario where like if Durant doesn't play, they just have no chance to win. Like I just don't feel like that should be the case when you have a big three. But for whatever reason, that seems to be the issue for them. But obviously their situation is not quite as dire as the Pacers, but
Sure.
it's just kind of like a constant reminder of like, geez, like, this team just can't seem to find, be able to string healthy games together. And that seems to be a major problem for them. And then surprising, in a good way, to be honest, like the Bulls honestly have been
Mm.
better than I would have
Mhm.
expected, honestly, right? Like they're a couple games under 500. Like they're still not like a great team,
Mhm.
but just the fact that they've been able to kind of hang around, which I still feel like they should be shopping some of those guys, but I think, and part of that is because some of the guys that they're trying to shop have played well, which is to their benefit.
Yeah.
And then like the Pistons, I think we thought they'd be better, but I think the fact that like Cade Cunningham has been playing like an all-star, because that was a guy that I think a lot of people were very questioning and concerned about.
That was
Just from
me.
just from the perspective of we didn't know what he was going to look like in a presumably better situation. Now they just got crushed by the Jazz. That's going to happen over the course of a season where you just have some bad losses. And they've kind of slid as of late. But, they're a team where I think you should be higher on them now, just from the perspective of if I look at the lower seeded teams in the East outside of Philly, where it's like they've just been decimated due to injuries. They're kind of the team that I would look at as like they could take the next step and be better, right? Like maybe like at the deadline or next season, like if they can kind of figure out, what to do maybe in terms of trades or, whatever flexibility. So I'm higher on them now than I was going into the season, even though I think we both thought they'd be better. But they've been even, I think, because like they're 11-17. I mean, they probably didn't even get their 11th win last season until like, February, March or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, again, it can't be understated how terrible that team was last season. And obviously, like part of it is like they have some more serious vets now, so that's kind of a big key too, right? They got some 3-point shooting, and now you're kind of seeing like what a more optimized version of Cade Cunningham looks like, and that's really good to see as well, just because of the fact that again, there were people, and not even just you, like many
Yeah.
other people, right? That just
Yeah.
weren't really sure, what to make of that team, like what to make of Cade Cunningham. Like, could he be like an all-star type guy? Is he kind of like a good stats, bad team guy? And sometimes you just kind of have to see what it looks like. And so far they're getting positive results from him, right? Like he's
Yeah.
basically averaging close to a triple double on a team that has a losing record, but is significantly better than last season. I mean, like I just checked; they didn't get their 11th win until March 11th last
Jeez,
season.
man. Yeah. As long as they were
So
better than that, that's good.
yeah, it took them 64 games to win 11 games.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, and I mean, like that was one of their last couple of wins. Anyways, they finished it. They finished the season with 14 wins,
Yeah.
so they're already about to cross that, which is good. That's what you want to see from this team.
Yeah, I like your picks a lot. I agree with all of them. I think the Indiana one definitely makes a lot of sense. I think I would have probably pegged them around like number 6 or something like that.
Mm,
But yeah, the injuries definitely hurt. And then Phoenix,
yeah,
yeah, I get that as well. And then obviously Detroit and Chicago.
yeah,
I think those make sense as well.
yeah. So now, NBA rumors they're heating up. Just kind of a quick check-in, just to discuss. Obviously, it's one game, so you're not gonna really take a lot of cues from one game, right? But the Warriors, they did play their first game with Dennis Schroeder against the Memphis Grizzlies, and they lost by basically 50 points. So, not a great performance there. Of course, like again, it's one game, so you can't really factor in a whole lot from it. Also, like Steph probably had his worst game of I don't even know forever. I mean, he had 2 points, was 0 for 7, minus 41. I mean, Draymond had 0 points. The leading scorer was Brandon Pajemski, right? Who pretty much every Warriors fan has wanted to trade. I mean, obviously, it's who cares in a 50-point loss, but just in general, it's just been kind of interesting to see this team, start the year off so well and then just kind of completely fall off. I mean, they're like 1-9 in the last 10 games. And they're kind of slowly starting to fall back into that spot from last season, right? Where, again, last season this was kind of a similar thing where they started off looking really good and then they've slid. They'll be better. But it's just a scenario like because in this game they lost because everybody played horribly. I mean, like, the team shot 29% or 35% from the field, right? So like that's going to happen, especially when the other team shoots well above 50% from the field and from three. Like this is part of the 3-point conversation, that we had before anyways. But
Mm-hmm.
just in general, not a whole lot to take away from this game. I mean, Schroeder was 2 for 12, 5 points, 5 assists, 4 turnovers, 0 for 4. I mean, it's one game, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's just kind of something, to think about just from the perspective of, like we talked about, they will still need more. And again,
Yeah.
like they're not going to play this badly every game. But I feel like it's still kind of apparent that they're not in that tier that I think people may have thought they were to begin the season. I feel like they are better than what we thought about them going into the season, but they're not as good, obviously, as what we thought to begin, which I don't even think was realistic anyways,
Yeah.
just due to the personnel on the roster. But, these are the type of games where it's like, it's pretty apparent that you just need more. And again, it's a horrible game. So it's one horrible game, but it's just tough, right? Because they're still holding on to these young guys that probably just aren't going to be able to help them at the level that they want them to this season. But how much are they going to be willing to give up those young guys, particularly for whomever's available, which we'll get into in a moment.
Yeah, I think, it kind of goes without saying. They had a very good hot stretch. A lot of their pieces were playing well, but it kind of goes back to the whole depth thing. There's definitely something they should have done, in terms of bringing in a star in the offseason, but I think they're potentially going to try and address that, during the deadline. But yeah, they're sliding bad.
Yeah. And now moving on to some news and rumors. There was a big one that occurred that was reported a couple days ago, or I guess it was on the same day as the Cup. Um, the Bulls and the Nuggets, I guess, the Nuggets have talked about they're interested in multiple different types of guys, but they mentioned Zach LaVine as like the key guy. They mentioned a few other names. They did mention Jordan Clarkson, Jordan Poole. I believe Ingram was also on that list as well. Now, obviously, any deal involving like a big contract guy, right? That would have to include Michael Porter Jr. because they don't have a lot of mid-level salaries on that roster that they can really move. But what do you think about this, right? Because, obviously, if they were to pull this off, depending on which guy they get, I mean, obviously, you don't have to trade a bunch for Clarkson. Poole makes a lot of money, but definitely not quite as much as LaVine or Ingram, I don't think. But just in general, what do you think about them possibly targeting any of these guys? Because it would be a pretty stark shift and change from what they've had, right? But we've talked about it at the same time, like any major change for this team would have to involve Michael Porter Jr., who has actually played really well this
Yeah.
season. So it's not like he's a problem for this team in terms of why they're not playing well. We've talked about like the need for more 3-point shooting, the need for some serious, second unit contributors, and things like that. But what are your thoughts on if the Nuggets were to pull off a deal involving any of these guys? Like, do you have a favorite? Do you not like any of them, or what?
Well, it's clear the Nuggets have a type that they're looking for. They
Mhm.
they're looking for, an offensive guy, which I think is good. And it's definitely ranging in terms of the prices, like the price tag on some of these guys is kind of wild. But then there's other ones that are a little bit more affordable. But I kind of like all of them. If you want me to be honest, I think the one that I'm probably the least highest on is maybe Jordan Poole, just because I think that's a lot of money, and where does he fit into the rotation? Because like you said, you're giving up Michael Porter Jr. for one of these guys, that have the higher price tag. So it's like, Poole's making a crap ton of money. Do you start him? Do you bench him? What do you do there? I would probably say you got to go big, go home, and go after Zach LaVine. I think I like him the most for the team. It would be good to maybe put him at the 2. But yeah, I think, if you're going after Jordan Poole, or I think the other one you mentioned was Jordan Clarkson, I think that would
Mhm.
be good bench depth because you definitely need it.
And then Ingram, I think, was also mentioned as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really like that one. If you want me to be honest, I think I understand like you're getting a forward for a forward, but I think his play style, I couldn't really imagine him playing next to Jokic. Like, what would that really look like? I guess it would give you another creator, but
Mhm.
doesn't that kind of take away from what, Jokic is pretty good at? I feel like you would kind of want somebody a little bit different. I don't know. Really,
And that's
ideally, you would want just Jamal Murray to play like his himself in the title year, but
yeah, and I
that's
think
neither here nor there.
yeah, and I think that's the aspect that I think is the tough part is that like the biggest fix, not that it would fix everything because you'd still have the problems of the 3-point shooting and the bench play, but like the bench play could be better if you got a better version of Murray. And then, the 3-point shooting would be better if you got a better version of Murray. And again, it's a team thing, so it's not like you pin all the blame on one guy,
Mm-mm.
but it would be just such a very stark change, because regardless of who they acquire, they wouldn't have the same level of size. Levine obviously is a good athlete.
Yeah.
I just kind of wonder like what it would look like. But I think at the very least, if you're the Nuggets, you probably have to at least do something, just because of the fact that I don't think this is sustainable. Where you're asking Jokic to basically give you almost 40 minutes a game and like being like the league leader or close to the league leader in like three different categories. I
Yeah.
just don't think that's sustainable. You're also going to get a significantly worse defensive version of him, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't think you really want over the course of the season because you're just not. It's just not realistic to ask him to give you that much on offense and then not expect to drop off on the defensive end. So I don't know. Again, all of these come with pros and cons. And then obviously for Levine, the other factor is, of course, the injury factor, right? Because Michael Porter Jr., funny enough, has actually been pretty durable the last few seasons, right? That's part of why I think he's making the money that he's making now is because that was a clause, I think, in his deal where he had to play enough games, and he's been able to do that. I mean, Levine is better, right? But it's just kind of the factor that we talked about where for the Nuggets, because they've lost out on guys that make, decent amounts of money, like you don't have the ability to just kind of put together like a few guys, like say Reggie Jackson, right? Like that's a guy that in theory you could be like, we don't really care as much about that guy, not to be mean, but you know what I mean? Like you could put that guy into the deal. You could put like Zeke Naji into the deal, and then maybe like something else. And that would still wouldn't get you to 30 million. But like,
Mm-mm.
then also like losing KCP. Bruce Brown, you had to lose because you just couldn't afford to keep him. But not having those type of salaries is the part that I think is kind of just a killer. Just because if you had that in your back pocket, not that you wouldn't be able to get like Levine or Poole, but you could add on and be like, all right, let's get, like a $20 million guy without having to give up a key guy in our rotation.
Yeah.
But you can't
Right.
really do that.
Yeah.
So
Their
I guess
hands are
that's the
tied.
question is like, say if you're the GM for the Nuggets, say you're Calvin Booth,
Okay.
would you pull the trigger on any of these deals?
Yeah, that's tough because, like you said, I think you would love to do it if you could end up keeping Michael Porter Jr. But it sounds like they're potentially ready to move on from him. I mean, if this rumor is out there, I think they're looking for a change. It's interesting that they're looking for a change in that direction because it's something that's actually working.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would look towards the bench, high quality bench player, but a lot of teams aren't really willing to give that up for just willy nilly. So, um, to answer your question, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna pull the
Okay.
trigger. Screw it, why not?
Mhm.
Change of scenery that might help. Some of these guys, and I think a lot of the guys that you mentioned, their value has been rehabbed. I think pretty well, like fairly well. Like I'm not low on Zach Levine, not low on JP. Clarkson's decent. Brandon Ingram's pretty good as well. So, I just wouldn't do the Ingram one, but yeah,
Mhm.
I'd do all the others.
Yeah, I don't know. I almost wonder like if they may be better off like just getting some bench depth,
Yeah.
but we'll see because we just don't know. At this point, but the fact that like you said, this stuff is out there, we know that means that they're searching, which again is what they have to do, right? Because you got one of the best players in basketball on a team that's kind of they've been playing better as of late, but we know that they're probably not quite good enough to be able to completely get it done. We know that they need at least some additional pieces. So,
Yeah.
it's good that they're, kind of operating on this, but it's still kind of disappointing that they've, lost some key players, and I feel like that would probably help them at this point.
Yeah. for sure.
Um, Moving on, according to Jake Fisher, right, he's, put out some rumors about things. He said Warriors evaluating front court, Golden State looking to improve center rotation at a trade deadline. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. Obviously, like, your centers are essentially like, Draymond at the 5, or I think now the last couple of games they've been starting Kevon Looney. Right at the beginning of the season, they were starting Trace Jackson Davis. He's kind of fallen off. So that makes sense, I think. I mean, again, we'll see who they acquire, right? Like a lot of fans have kind of been talking about like Vucevic. Maybe they go after a guy like a Valanciunas or, some of these other centers out there. It's just I feel like the center rotation, like even though they've been really good on the defensive end, it's just you feel like they need like probably another guy, to kind of unlock some of that front court depth. But, just in general, they've also talked about the idea of a star. And like I said, I still don't know how much they're actually going to commit to, moving on from these guys unless there's like a home run type of deal. Like I don't really feel like they would trade like, some of those guys to get Vucevic. Maybe they would, but I don't know. I feel like they would prefer to kind of, you know, make sure that they do a deal where they know for sure if we do this, we're going to be right there. But I could be wrong because the
Yeah,
Schroeder one, as we talked about, is low risk,
yeah,
right?
I
You
think
don't lose
yeah.
anything
I
from
don't
that.
expect them to gamble on a deal like this. I think they would definitely, take their time, measure things out, figure out if they, want to get a center or, get a star or something like that. So, yeah, that's an interesting one because I think that they definitely need it. That's clear and evident. So,
Yeah, and and he also mentioned the idea that like a number of centers are like that's the center position in general. Every team wants, which is no surprise because you do need some. A lot of teams need this front court depth. They need these bigger players to kind of help them out. In a lot of different areas, right? Like you mentioned, teams like the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, even the Pelicans, right? All of them are eyeing, centers and things like that. So, I would expect the trade market to probably heat up. There's been talks about like maybe the Schroeder deal. Does that kind of make it so that maybe teams are going to have to lower their asking prices for certain guys, which again is not a shocker to me personally, because I just, some of these guys, like I just never thought Schroeder was going to go for like an unprotected first. I don't even think Cam Johnson is going to go for 2 firsts. Maybe he goes for 1,
mm.
but I just think in general some of the asking prices are higher than I think they'll actually get. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the market's been reset for sure.
Yeah. Um well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on the NBA Cup, the NBA ratings, of course, and just all this trade rumor deadline, stuff going on. Because again, the NBA season is heating up. We're getting to that time now where everybody's going to be in something in terms of like teams are going to be looking for certain players are going to be looking for certain teams. We're going to have to figure out what's true and what isn't. But at the very least, the cup is over. Congratulations to the Bucks. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we will read it at the beginning of the episode. See you next episode.